Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lam. But let me exit YouTube before we start watching things we don't want to watch. Okay, so I think you've got some very interesting presentations from our panelists. I've got a few questions here to get us started. Again, if you have new questions, please send them by email or chat, Zoom chat to Just, and then she will pass them on to me. So the first question I wanted to ask was somebody asked that said that the geo address lookup scheme looks great. Is it available now for public use? So I don't know whether Donald or Danny wants to respond to that.
I'm Donald. Perhaps I can answer this in a concise way. Yes, the geo address has already been opened up in the Open Data Portal, Government's Open Data Portal. The URL is data.gov.hk, and you can actually, when you get into the portal, you can do a search on the address lookup service. Then the service itself will, apart from all those textual address information, there's another piece of data called the geo address attached to each address. So I will appeal to all to make good use of this information. Currently the geo address has, we have been gradually building up the full set of geo address for Hong Kong, and currently there are over 100,000 already, which I would say it covers around more than half already. And in terms of coverage, it already covers basically around 99% of public housing estate, as well as 95% of residential buildings. Not to say it also covers address like the library and public hospital as well. So
when's your expectation that you would reach essentially, coverage of nearly everything?
Our target is perhaps maybe Danny can further supplement, but our target is to complete the mapping of all these geo address within this year.
Okay.
Perhaps maybe Danny can supplement.
Yes, this is Danny. Yes. The geo address project is led by OGO in collaboration with RVD and our lands department. And the project is expected to be completed by October this year. So by that time, we expected to have like more than, I would say, 170,000 addresses associated with the geo address. So,
can I ask you to explain a little bit? You talked very briefly in your presentation about the difference between the building ID and the geo address, and you said they were similar. So can you explain a little bit? So for example, if I have multiple buildings vertically dispersed but at the same geolocation, how do you distinguish those in the building ID system?
Okay, well, the format of the building sales UID is the same as the geo address. But the only difference is that when you have, as I mentioned in my presentation, when there are multiple buildings, there's only one address, and there's only one geo address as well.
Right.
So how can we distinguish it? You have to look at the sequence of the format of the geocode. It consists of a 19 digit. The first 10 digits is about the geographic location. And then the 11th digit is about the type of the building. If it is a P, it represents a podium. It is a T, it represents a tower. So in your cases, if a tower on top of podium, you can basically distinguish this by looking at the geo address code of the.
So your example of Pacific Place would be that you've got the podium, which is the shopping area, and then the tower on top, which is, say, the hotels or the offices. Have I understood it correctly?
Yes, correct.
Right.
And also the last 8 digit is the creation date of the record. So right. just in case if a building demolished, that we still can keep track of this building.
Okay, that's very helpful. So somebody also asked then, other than buildings themselves, so can the geo address be extended to cover pathways, or in fact the examples I think that one of you gave about a sports field, right? Is it possible to extend the geo address concept to cover pathways and fields?
Okay, let me say, well, when we are talking about walking path, I really need to mention one of our latest open data set called the 3D pedestrian network. As mentioned, as also mentioned in Victor Keylog's speech earlier.
Right.
This data set was designed to support pedestrian navigation. And we have already released it to the public last year. So I think that all the great ingredients, like the address lookup service, the geo address, and the 3D pedestrian network are already there. I think we just need to combine them to make them work together.
So does that mean there are identifiers for each of the pathways in the pedestrian network that we could use?
Yeah, you can just use the coordinates, and also like it depends on, you can like use the address, the coordinate, or use the search API from our department to use it.
So what about the example of the sports field? I think came up right in the sense that there had been COVID cases linked to, say, a sports field. Can that also be in some way, is there again some identifier that we can use other than just the general spatial coordinates?
Well, we can use some, I believe the Live Home Safe have a specific code for those kind of things too.
So, but is it possible that there will be a public API so for example, so let me just give you an example of a Hong Kong U project that we did in the past, which was about playgrounds, right? Playgrounds, we wanted to make it accessible that people could find playgrounds with specific capabilities for different types of children. So in that sort of situation, is there a public API that would enable us to match playgrounds, not just ones managed by government, but ones from the private sector?
Yeah, we have the, well, we are going to release some map data, digital topographic map data, which include like the building, some site. In the site data set, you can find the playground in that data set.
But we're not yet at the stage where there is, say, for example, a set of unique identifiers for those playgrounds.
No, not yet.
You have to do it on a spatial basis.
Right, right.
Okay. So that's something maybe for the future. Okay,
Yeah.
so a very different
Professor,
yes.
Professor Ed,
Yes.
Perhaps I can supplement a bit about
Sure.
about why we produce this kind of geo address.
Yes.
It is basically similar to the concept of a zip code.
Yes.
And the geo address is actually quite intuitive in terms of that sense. It maps to a kind of an address, which is like not all ordinary people would make use of. For example, we make use of a postal address to mail something to others. Then this address will be mapped to a geo address. The concept is kind of a zip code, but embedded with geolocation or in terms of the geospatial information on it. So you can just think of this way.
The issue is that, for example, as an end consumer. So I mean, I'm gonna come to Mr. Lam in a minute to talk about the logistic context. But as a consumer, where I'm having to input my address, say for delivery from the supermarket, it's very tedious to type it in. Every different logistic context, I have to input my address in a different way. And sometimes it rejects it and says this is not the right format, and they may deliver it to the wrong location. So I guess the question is, can we expect that the end user who's inputting it, that if I understand the code that Danny was talking about, sounds rather long to be memorized, right? So would I, as an end user, actually need to memorize those 18 digits? Or would, for example, the first, I think, was it 10 digits or whatever, which were the geolocation plus the letter be sufficient in practice? So, have you thought through about what the general public interface might be?
Yes, I think this is a very good question indeed. And first of all, we in the Open Data Portal we have already opened up an corresponding API, so that it is actually I think it is not difficult to make use of this kind of API to build a more intuitive interface. For example, just by typing an address structurally and then retrieve the geo address automatically from the API. In that way, we can expect that there can be some kind of commercial application or some handy tools, for example, under the future common spatial data infrastructure program, which will.
Does that mean in effect this is an opportunity for the private sector, or is it something that the government is going to do?
The government has already opened up this kind of information through an API already. Right. And so we would, of course, the government can also build this kind of interface. For example, we can encourage the post office to embed this geo address into I understand they have a online web tools for people to input their address in a structured way, so that this can also be added to their tools, so that the geo address can be automatically retrieved and then added to, for example, a mailing label. Right. Then in that way, in terms of the postal delivery, it will be more accurate. And also, I think this can be of good use for logistic company like.
Right. So you've given me exactly the right lead. So I'm going to ask Chi Lam to respond. Yes. So in fact, one of the questions was that during the virus, when in the extreme case of the virus, the post office reduced service to many areas, and in some cases, they even stopped deliveries to some areas. So I guess to what extent can the private sector address this issue in general, and what sort of data would facilitate the private sector doing a better job of this in the future? Chi Lam, you want to respond?
Hello. Actually, Spatial is not just an aggregator, so that we are aggregating closed office service and including any other private sector like FedEx, UPS, logistic provider service in our platform, so that during the COVID pandemic, the post office was suspended their service for several weeks, right? So we still have our private sector logistic service provider. At this moment, we can easily to allocate the logistic volume to satisfy our client needs for the delivery needs. However, we need to confirm the courier and actually the COVID precautions in this moment. We need to get all the information from our partner, like a service provider. They already got a list of the confirmed cases for different locations, so that they are not going to serve in this area. However, in our aspect, we feel that it's not yet a timely update and accurate for us, so that we are trying to search some data source from our government, so that our developer have found Hong Kong Geodata Store, and we're doing some API connections with this API data source, and which is much more precise and timely update for us to netting our courier to understand which location was being impacted, and we are not going to serve in this area. For our platform, we can directly reflect this infected area and not going to being a service area to our client, and let them got a very great expectation for the service level, so that in this moment, we still can maintain our service to our client and satisfy their delivery needs in this moment.
So presumably when the geo address coverage is essentially full, that this will generally improve the quality of delivery services from everybody, not just the post office, but the private sector. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let me go to a somewhat different topic. So this is the issue really about the dashboard and how it can help. So we had a question that said, as an end user, how can I make use of the dashboard to stay safe during COVID? So presumably means both to know whether I'm safe at home or at work. So Danny, would you like to illustrate maybe how we can use the dashboard for us?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe let me share my screen with you. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen fine. Thank you.
Okay, let me make it larger. Okay, this is the dashboard that we have developed for the CHP. To answer that questions, I think there are two ways of using dashboard to inform user where the confirmed cases are. I think the most intuitive way is just by looking at the map, right? And we have already put all the confirmed cases on the map with color. So, and also when you look at the color, and you can actually see where are the confirmed cases are. And also we have developed a feature, a search feature. So you can basically, user can just type in, like just zoom in. Basically, user can just type in an address or place name, or use its mobile location, or just click on a map, and then define your searching radius. In this case, 500 meter. You can see 500 meter. And then once you have defined the search criteria, the dashboard will automatically filter out or find out all the confirmed cases within that buffer. And you can see at the right-hand side of the screen, it filtered out like that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cases within 500 meters from the point that I just located. So this is the feature that the dashboard provides to facilitate people to know where the confirmed cases are. Okay.
So actually, that leads into a question we got, which was, there are other websites. In other words, if we, in addition to the government's website, there are other websites which are arguably more user-friendly than the one the government did, because they can do things much more quickly. So to what extent does the government see as its responsibility to facilitate a citizen website in addition to implementing your own dashboard? So what sort of initiatives do you have in future so that if there is another outbreak of another infectious disease, people can create their own dashboards in addition to the government one?
Professor, perhaps I'm Donald. Perhaps I can address this question. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19, the government has actually doing things like we have been opening up various open data sets. In fact, we open up more than 20 open data sets in relation to COVID-19. So actually, the dashboard, as demonstrated by Danny, is one of the byproduct of open data. They actually make use of these open data to build their dashboard.
So can I put my finger on you a little bit and say, well, so if I looked at the data behind that dashboard, is any of that data not open data?
No.
They're all open data.
They're all open data. They're all based on open data.
Okay, then you've answered my question.
And actually, the dashboard has not fully utilized all the 20 data sets.
Right.
I think it's 23 open data sets.
Okay.
And in fact, I've been approached by a number of web and app developer asking for advice on how to make use of this open data set. And we also send out a data dictionary, the metadata, and also explain the mechanism of, for example, the time of day of each update, of the update of each data set. And actually, recently, I was approached by one of the industry player asking about the same thing, because he wants to develop an app for his own company so that he can timely implement work from home measures. For example, if there's his working colleague has been living in the same building of an infected person, then he may ask the colleague to work from home for a
Sure.
certain period of time. So I think this kind of open data set has actually helped the public and the industry a lot.
Absolutely. So
Of
I mean, I
building
think
their
that,
own
well, that's
application.
a great example that it's driven by open data. So I don't know if there's anybody here from the transport department. I apologize if I'm a little rude, but I mean, I think the counterexample to what you guys have done is the transport department's app on mobility, which frankly, in my view, is very poor. It's very unuser friendly compared to, say, something like Citymapper. I think Gene, who was working for Citymapper before, is one of the people here. But I mean, I think Citymapper is a wonderful app, and it saved me during the protest when I couldn't get home from Chun Mun, enabled me to get home, even though many forms of transport were being shut. Whereas the transport department app to me was terrible. So the key, to me, the key issue is that the more important thing is for government to facilitate third sector NGOs and commercial sector to do things while having, I think the proof of concept is excellent. So I think the dashboard as a proof of concept is wonderful, but making sure that all the data is open so that other people can try and create something better, I think is also important. So I think that's
Yeah.
the framing of it. So I'm very happy that you've said that all of that is framed around open data.
Yes, actually, this is the reason why the government promulgated open data policy back in 2008. So
well,
this
I think saying publicly on the website, you know, all of the data here is open, would be very helpful. And in the same way, there was one other thing I meant to reference earlier. The Leave Home app in your presentation, you talked about the privacy assessment of that. Now, one of the conversations I'd had with PCPD previously was that when I went looking, I couldn't find the privacy assessment of the Leave Home app. In fact, the assessment is very good. And I think we saw the PCPD assessment in Eric's presentation. But what I would have liked to have seen was more openness about that assessment. In other words, because there's still so much misinformation. I still see on Facebook so many people who are concerned that Leave Home Safe will invade their privacy, which I think is basically lack of understanding. So I think the third-party assessment of the Leave Home app, making that, you know, having more publicity around that, to me would be extremely helpful, because I believe that it is a good app and it's privacy safe, but I think in order to increase trust, it's that third-party assessment. It's not just the government saying it's safe, but having the third parties, which I think are really important. So I think both, you know, doing things and telling people how you have done them, that is very important. Can I switch to Eric now? So, sorry, Hong Kong, you, Eric. So there was a question that came in, I think, about asking for a little bit more elaboration about your approach. So I think if we compare your presentation with the one that Donald gave, right? So he basically compared Leave Home against Apple Google. You only really compared against Apple Google. So I guess, how does your approach fit relative to those two? Does it address the problems that Donald identified, in the sense that if you have a hotspot, then there's nothing much you can do about it?
Thank you. Yes, that's the general idea is actually, as Donald pointed out, the Google-Apple contact tracing, when two phones are communicating to one another, you have no idea where in the world they are. They're just sending a Bluetooth signal between the two. And it's coded. So that coded signal also doesn't know the identity of this phone nor the identity of this phone. It's a rotating identifier. So every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, they send different identifiers and they memorize them. But you have no idea where in the world they are. It occurred to us, if that's happening between two phones that are mobile, that are always moving, if you had even just a third phone that never moves, it just stays in the space, then actually it can keep passing the signal. These two phones pass it to the third phone that never moves. Then actually, if those phones disappear, this phone that gets notified because one of the two phones was a COVID case, then we know where it happened. And all of this works just with Google and Apple. It's just the expense, the added expense of having that third phone, because phones are expensive. So instead of having a third phone, you could, and that would actually be an easy way to deploy it citywide, especially because a lot of people have an extra cell phone that they could leave in a space. So if we had Google, Apple contact tracing or exposure notification is what it's called now. Sorry, I use the old original name because I was involved even before it came out with it. So I'm more attuned to the original name than the new name. But Google, Apple exposure notification, if we had it in Hong Kong, you could essentially drop a third phone that just lives in the space. And if that phone goes off, you know it was something that was coming through the space.
So this might be a solution for small businesses, such as small restaurants, then stick an old phone permanently in their restaurant and use that as essentially a geo-reference. Have I got the right concept?
Correct. And it's completely privacy preserving because the phone will get notified if it was a space of contact. However, it won't have any idea what phone it traced back to, which one.
Cool.
So in this example, if I had two phones here and have the third phone just sitting in the space, one of the phones, they're always passing identifiers, which you have no idea which phone is passing which identifier. But if it goes off, you upload it to the hospital authority or the health authority. The health authority then transmits it across to all devices. And if it sees that it had seen one of those go off, then this one will go off, and then you know exactly where it was. But this phone is rather expensive. So we're just using very inexpensive hardware that does the same thing.
But my guess would be that most people have old phones sitting around which they don't really use anymore. So for example, a restaurant could stick a phone on their entrance, which is displaying the QR code, but is also the beacon for the geolocation.
Yeah, you wouldn't need the QR code. So my two, forgive me, but my two criticisms of the Leave Home Safe app would be, one is that if you have multiple very inexpensive devices, such as old cell phones, and you have a location like a restaurant, you could drop in 2 or 3 of them in the restaurant. And a lot of people in Hong Kong have old phones. I've been asking.
Sure.
A lot of people have more than one device, and all you need is Bluetooth in your device, and you can plug it in, and you could drop 2 or 3 in a rather large restaurant.
And my point was simply that you know, if you don't want to give up the QR code as the start point, it could be your QR code display as well as your Bluetooth.
Yeah, it could be a QR code, but I was about to return to the QR code as a concept. So with QR code, you have to, I've been seeing it, people man the door and they make sure that you fill out the form or someone scans in the QR code. You have to do that quite manually. The nice thing about the Google Apple is it trades it in the background all the time. In fact, I downloaded in my own phone the Irish app because we don't have it in Hong Kong. And so all the time, every few seconds, it's trading with whoever else has the Irish app. Or it doesn't actually, you don't need the Irish app. It's trading the identifier all the time, basically. So you don't have to remember to scan it in. It just is always doing it in the background.
Right. So I mean, some of the small restaurants were complaining about the difficulty of customers who write down Mickey Mouse, you know, as their name, and they write down Disneyland as their address, right? So this presumably would be an alternative. You could say in a restaurant, you know, we will do this anonymous Bluetooth communication with your phone if you come in, instead of requiring you to scan the QR code. Is that, if I understood the concept?
Correct. And also in the Leave Home Safe app, I can go into the app now and look at all the different places I've been to.
Sure.
But that also means other.
So this would be essentially an extension of the Leave Home Safe app as a start point, which would be, instead of scanning a QR code, for some locations, I could just simply allow my phone to do the Bluetooth connection to these known locations.
I would see it as a different approach. Like I think it buys into the Google Apple approach, but just as a way to participate, so we get the location is really how I see it.
So at least the Department of Health would still be able to do something about hotspots.
Yes, exactly. It would know where it is. It just wouldn't know who exactly went through there.
Okay. Anybody? So I'm not trying to put Donald or Danny on the spot. If you want to comment, that's fine.
Actually, Professor, I've some immediate questions and
Sure.
and observation. First of all, I think Professor Eric and our department's thinking are basically aligned in terms of that the Google and Apple framework has its deficiency in terms of the spatial element.
Mhm.
So we are all finding a way try to address this spatial element, right? And the difference is that the suggestion made by Professor Eric is based on the Google Apple framework, and while our in our case are based on our self-built QR code mechanism. And some immediate questions are about the suggestion by Professor Eric is that I think someone will definitely ask who owned the first phone, who will be responsible to upload or to upload the or to initiate a sharing of signal of contact with other person. For example, in case if a restaurant use this kind of proposed way to do the notification, then who owns that phone? First of all, if the government owns that phone, then there will, of course, there will some criticism arise that, okay,
So,
this phone is owned by government, so
yeah,
they can know our whereabouts. And
I don't think that's going to work. But I mean, I think Eric's thinking, as I understand it, which I support, is essentially you've got a situation where restaurants are complaining about the difficulties of their current situation from their perspective. So we're trying to offer something which is easier for them. And essentially all they do from their perspective is in effect using the Apple Google framework. It's just that by pre-registering that particular phone with a location, right, just that phone having the pre-registration, then that enables them to be allowed to do that instead of the QR code. I guess that's what I would be thinking of.
Yes, but just in case if there's someone infected that happens to appear in that location,
Right.
so that first phone should receive a signal from the infected person in case he is willing to share that he was infected. Then
because I mean, you need, whatever happens, you need the restaurant to be aware.
But the first phone also needs to do something.
Yes.
He also needs to issue an alert and signal to others that come into who happens to be in that particular places as well. But my question is, who will be responsible to issue that alert?
Well,
the owner of that restaurant?
No. My assumption, Eric can correct me, is that the DH would know that, right? Because that's a phone registered as a geolocator for that restaurant. So in the same way that you're registering for the QR code, the alternative is you register the phone for your restaurant.
Yes. Right? So you mean that the Department of Health has to ask the owner of that restaurant, please issue the signal using that phone, right?
Let me make a few corrections and observations. So yes, the system that we're thinking about is very privacy preserving, meaning that it would have to be the owner of the phone in the restaurant. And let's just use that analogy. I think it's a good analogy. So in essence, the owner of that phone would then have to announce in some format that the phone has been notified. That phone also received an alert. How that happens, though, could be multiple ways. One way is to say this is the address of the restaurant, and just to make sure that everyone, it is a notifiable disease. So to make sure that the health authority puts it on the map. The second is it is a notifiable disease. So the person is the legal responsible person to notify that I went to that restaurant. I think it lands on the person who does have COVID to release that information. And I haven't studied this at depth. And part of the study, we also want to do a legal sort of overview of this as well. We haven't gotten to that stage yet, but this would be the next stage to do. But also, I think the restaurant owner, if the phone is alerted, could also decide, I don't want to release my address because it's the phone that's been notified and not the person. And therefore, but they can still send the signal to all the phones that phone had seen at a lesser level.
Right.
Just like the Google, Apple contact tracing is already doing. That's why it's privacy preserving. So think about the most extreme case. The most extreme case is, in my opinion, and this is where actually the thinking starts, is something that's illegal. So someone who's doing something illegal is not going to register for Leave Home Safe for their illegal activities. But they might put a phone, if it's all the phones in that space or participating in the Google, Apple, because then they have the control of the situation. And of course, the illegal activities are very slim. There's so few illegal activities. But if you're trying to come up with a system that really tries to reach fully all aspects of society, I think we actually have to take into account all aspects.
So if you like the unregistered one, so that I'm not sure the amount of illegal activity is that small. I mean, I think we know that the government has busted a number of illegal bars and restaurants, right, that have been operating without social distancing and have been operating outside the official hours. So I have no difficulty with, if you like, the fully privacy preserving version as an option for those people, because again, even if they still have some interest in warning their customers if they've been exposed. But I think the notification part, I agree entirely. I mean, it seems to me, in effect, what we're saying is the alternative for a restaurant in future might be, instead of putting up a QR code, you put a registered phone at the entrance of your restaurant, right? Or your gym or whatever else we're talking about, so that we provide a technologically superior solution that is still privacy preserving, and it, if you like, leverages both the benefits of the Leave Home app and the advantages of the Apple Google framework, while addressing some of each of their shortcomings, right?
Yeah. I mean, let me be clear. I really appreciate the Leave Home app, and I use it all the time. I use it all the time.
Yes.
So I really deeply appreciate that effort has been made.
Yeah, I think it is a good start, but I think, again, we all recognize that you did it under extreme time pressure and you needed to do a privacy assessment. So the question is really about whether we can do better for next time, or when the virus comes back again, if it's simply that with mutation, it comes back every year, right? Clearly, we're going to need to find better solutions than the ones we already have. So
could I add one thing to the conversation?
Yes, please.
The influenza, the common cold, actually travels much the same way the coronavirus does. It also has, one of the studies that was done recently just for the US, it had $11.2 billion a year impact, was the estimated average annual total economic burden of the common cold to the US economy. It also results between 12,000 and 61,000 deaths a year in the US. No one is going to set up like a QR code system to scan in on the common cold, because we just take that $11.2 billion US dollar hit every year in the US and accept the 61,000 deaths annually. However, with this system, if it is in the background and it is automatic, that's a smarter city, because if you have a strain of influenza, you could actually notify the system, and then the risk of me in a common cold, I think, is rather low. But if I was older, say I was in my 90s, I might actually take much.
Don't you mean seasonal flu rather than the common cold, Eric?
Oh, sorry, seasonal flu.
Yeah, because seasonal flu does kill a lot of people. And actually, there are similar issues in the sense of whether people bother to do the vaccination.
Yeah.
Right? So I agree. I mean, I think if in effect, so the fascinating thing was, there was a report, I don't know if this is the same one you were talking about, which said that the number of deaths from flu has dropped drastically in the last 12 months. Because thanks to people social distancing and using masks, the risk of infecting others through influenza has dropped dramatically.
Yeah.
Now, what that didn't mention, of course, is I'm not sure is to what extent people have done their seasonal flu vaccination this year. I think some people of my age all went and made sure they got their seasonal flu vaccination, because the most scary thing would be to get both seasonal flu and COVID together, right? But I think, again, the point is, this is a broader concept, right? How can we generally address infectious diseases where some degree of distancing and notification can help to reduce the risk, right? And particularly if we can drive the costs down using very low cost add-ons to what we already have, which is smartphones, to reduce the number of deaths. I mean, again, it's again very tricky, because the people who die from influenza often are people who would have died fairly soon anyway, right? So it's a little bit tricky. It's not actually just about deaths, it's about the deferral of deaths. How much are you bringing deaths forward or later? Anyway, there were two other questions. So I want to bring the other Eric into the conversation, because one of the questions was essentially about the data protection ordinance. You made some reference to potential changes. So I guess the question is, to what extent can we leverage the data protection ordinance in Hong Kong to maximize the benefit for Hong Kong? So, you know, how is this played into this, or how can it play into generally the issue of sharing data, not just spatial data and not just virus data, but I think those are the obvious contexts.
Thank you, John, for relaying this question to me. But before answering that question, can I go back a little bit to the Leave Home Safe app?
Sure.
I must say that it's not an easy task for the government to develop this Leave Home Safe app within such a short period of time during these difficult times, and to be able to come up with an app that is easy to use, easy to explain, and trustworthy. So as I said in my presentation, my pre-recorded presentation, based on the examination of the key features of the app, the PCPD considers that this app, speaking from the perspective of personal data protection, is generally in line with the personal data privacy ordinance for the various reasons I have mentioned. And going back to the question that you have mentioned, John, I think you will all agree that a suitable and appropriately drafted data protection law will be able to protect the personal data rights of the individuals, which is some of the fundamental rights of individuals. And we believe that with ethical use and collection of personal data, and with the compliance with the personal data protection law by the organizations, people will have more trust in organizations in using their personal data, which in turn will facilitate the making of a smarter city. And I'm sure that many of you will know that actually the Hong Kong government and our office have been looking into the possibility of amending or updating the current personal data privacy ordinance in order to make it to keep in pace with times. Among other things, as the chief executive of the Hong Kong government has publicly stated, priority will be given to consider amending or strengthening the law in order to protect people from being doxxed, which is the malicious act of using people's personal data without the data subjects or the data users' consent, mainly on the internet, in order to attack or maliciously damage people's reputation, and in particular to cause psychological harm to the data subjects concerned. So that will be one of the priorities of the possible amendments to the law. And also, the government and our office have also been looking into some other aspects to step up protection of personal data privacy. Namely, well, actually, currently, there is not a requirement under the law for organizations which have experienced data breaches to notify our office or to notify the data subjects affected. So we have been looking into the possibility of introducing a mandatory notification system, which is important in the sense that timely notification can enable our office to help the organizations concerned to minimize the potential damage or harm to the people concerned. And notification to the data subjects concerned can also serve as a timely alert for the people, for them to protect themselves in a timely manner. Another aspect that we are looking into in this legislative review is to introduce a system whereby our office can impose financial penalty administratively instead of taking all the trouble and time to go to the court to seek compensation. So these are some of the areas that we have been looking into to strengthen personal data protection in general and in particular.
Thank you very much. So in fact, the one that comes to my mind, of course, is the Cathay data breach, right? Where ironically, although Cathay is a Hong Kong company, they had to report to the UK regulator, but not to you, and the UK regulator could fine them and you couldn't, right? Now, whether, of course, the irony is at the moment, the government's been giving Cathay money rather than taking it from them, but that's another story. Anyway, I think that's extremely, can I lead that into another question though, for Eric? Because somebody asked us about what are the benefits of storing data in Hong Kong? So maybe, why don't we talk about specifically as regards data protection principles, how that leads into benefits of storing data in Hong Kong?
Well, actually, under the current personal data protection law, personal data is not required to be stored in Hong Kong. The protection afforded by the current law is that if personal data, the processing, the collection, the handling, the holding of personal data is controlled by someone in or from Hong Kong, then the personal data protection law applies. So that's a quite wide coverage of protection currently. But as you can envisage, actually for personal data, which is controlled outside Hong Kong, it is not governed by the current data protection law. So that's a different issue then.
Okay, let me change track for a moment. There's a couple of questions which I think maybe, Danny, these are relevant to you. One question, I'm going to put them together for you to answer. So one was basically about alternatives to the building ID or geo address, which is, somebody said there is an international approach which relies on 3-meter grids, 3-meter square grids, whether you had considered something like this as the alternative. And then the other question, which I think you're the only person who maybe could comment on, is about satellite data. So the extent to which Hong Kong government either has or should be getting access to satellite data that we could use openly. Danny, did you hear me?
Okay. Well, at this moment, we only focus on the geo address and the building's issue ID. We haven't have another look at other system like the Watch 3 word, something like that.
Yeah. So I assume that you could easily map between yours and the 3-meter square grid system. Is that right?
Yeah, I understand this is the theory behind. Yeah.
So what about the satellite data? Is this something that the government, you think, needs to consider or has considered? Is there anything you can tell us about any plans for satellite data?
Well, I think the satellite data is very useful for us to building up a smart city. Well, in fact, our department has been using satellite data to make maps long times ago. And last year, we also make use of the satellite map to produce the imagery map API, and is also opened to the public in December last year. So I think the satellite image is very useful. And in other countries, they because of the coverage of the area, they significantly make use of the satellite map in many areas, like the disaster response. They will use the image for assessing the damage from the disaster, like the hurricane or forestry fire, something like that. So I think the satellite image data is very important, and we will still exploring how to use it.
Is any of this satellite data available as open data, or does it require considerable amounts of money in order to access currently?
Okay, for the satellite data that we use, we actually make use of the NASA, the Landsat data, and we manipulate the data, incorporate it to produce the image map API.
So is that data available openly, or it requires paying a fee?
It's open. And also the NASA, the Landsat data is also open to the public as well.
So I guess the only question would be, does that mean that we could place some of this in data.gov? Donald, is it possible that if this data is open, we could put the local part of it in data.gov?
Yes, you can go to our GeoData store, GeoData data store, GeoData store, and you can download actually consume free type of map API, like the topographic map API, the imagery map API, and the label map API. Yeah, it's open to the public.
But that's not directly the satellite data. That's basically your processed version of the satellite data.
No, the satellite data, well, the imagery map API make use of the satellite data.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Let me come back to the other Eric. So Hong Kong, you, Eric. There was a question about whether the sort of the beacon in a restaurant type idea can be extended to other situations, such as say minibuses and buses traveling around, because transport is again a big deal, right? I think that was one of the challenges for the Department of Health, because it's not really addressed by Leave Home Safe, is it? I don't know whether Eric or Donald wants to comment a little bit about it.
Perhaps I can give a little bit of information about the upcoming development of Leave Home Safe. As you can see from the news, actually we are partnering with Hong Kong U, but another department in researching on how to make use of this kind of concept, like a BLE beacon, and installed on some public transportation. We are actually trying to do some proof of concept in terms of installing this kind of beacon in some green minivans, and try to automate the check-in process, so that this can help to enhance the user experience. So, but we are, as I understand from my other colleague responsible for the initiative, there are some challenges that we need to figure out. For example, how to do the automatic check-in, because it may happen that there is a minivan just comes by when we are standing on the street, and then will this be automatically checked in for me? And this kind of nitty-gritty stuff that we need to sort out.
So you don't get accidentally included.
Yes.
Hong Kong, you, Eric, anything you want to say about the transport context?
Yes, I mean, there's a few different issues. One is cost. So the beacon, this is a Bluetooth beacon. And so that could work as well, because it transmits its beacon, and you can actually know where this is, and you can stick it to a surface and leave it there. We also thought about this as well, but this is sort of one way. And also it will drain the cell phone battery because it's not using Google, Apple contact tracing. So from a point of view of using the beacon with a phone, that's very, Google and Apple are quite against it because it also ties you to a place. And so that has limitations because of Google and Apple. Because this one trades, sorry, this is the mobile phone version, the inexpensive mobile phone version. This one acts just like a cell phone. So Google and Apple think this is a cell phone because it's trading ephemeral identifiers every few minutes. This one changes its identifier. Only the owner of this, it could be the bus company, would know if this one goes off, and it works in the background and at very low power. So this is already, I've had this on for months on using the Irish app and trading with devices like this for months. And it has no real noticeable hit on the battery power of my cell phone because it abides by the Google Apple rules. Therefore, it works in the background. But it still does the job. And it does the job actually quite invisibly. And then you could place, because this is only about, I mean, the hardware itself is $10 US, but with the card and the power, let's just call it $25. You could place this on a double-decker bus. You could place one on the upper deck and the lower deck. Then you would know, was there a transmission on the upper deck or lower deck? You could place it in the MTR. You could also place it.
So you could basically put one in every carriage as the MTR.
Yes, and so you would know that it was that carriage in the MTR that had a problem as well.
That doesn't address the issue about when you're walking through the station, though, presumably.
I mean, you could put one at the door of the station too, but I think it's more where people are for a longer time. Also, because these rotate every 10 to 15 minutes, you also know, it's actually that longer duration you're more worried about anyway. So you would get the signal from the phone to the chip, and you can see that it's coming in over 15 minutes. And it keeps updating all the time. It's always refreshing. It's just how much you want to hold on to. And again, this one does not know who the person is. It's trading IDs, so it doesn't tie to a person, and these IDs are rotating. So it's really safe as a person to use almost everywhere. And by the way, this is half the equation. I only described half because it's a little bit more fine-tuned, but there's another half to the equation actually allowing us to scan spaces, upload them for epidemiologists as well, but that's a whole different conversation, so I'll leave it out. But it's a bit more complex.
I'm going to give you a couple of minutes at the end, Eric, to wrap up.
Okay.
Anything else you want to say? So we're almost out of time. I just want to ask one last key question. So this is for all the panelists can have a say on this. So the question was actually, what are the 3 immediate things the government can do to make a difference? Right? I don't think it has to be 3. I think maybe we can each come up with one thing that we would like the government to do. So for the people from the government, you don't have to say what the government can do. You can say what the society should do or what the private sector should do, right? So just what one thing that you think would make a big difference in our ability to use and share data for public benefit. So who would
first,
like to start?
let me start first.
Sure.
Okay. Just some of my thoughts. Just to set the scene, since the opening up of the estimated time of arrival data from the public transportation back in 2019, actually we have seen a substantial increase of data download and API access to the Open Data Portal. I think this is a very good sign, and to date we have already around per month around 600 million data download, and also 400 million of API access, many of which are related to the estimated time of arrival data and the weather data. So with the upcoming opening up of the estimated time of arrival data of the KMB, as well as 70 lines of green mini bus, I think it is a good opportunity to further attract the interests of the public and industry of consuming open data for the use. And this may well serve as the tipping point to on the open data landscape in Hong Kong. This is the point, my first point. And
well,
also,
I think one, Donald, because I want to let everyone else.
Okay.
Just one, okay? Who wants to go next? Eric?
Can I? Yeah,
Eric?
yeah. Just one quick point. As you all will agree, transparency dispels myths. Transparency also enhances trust. So when the government is continuing with its various initiatives in opening up data, I think it's important for the government to continue to be transparent about what it has done to protect personal data if and when personal data is involved in the data being opened.
Excellent.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. I already gave Donald my example earlier on, right? Release the privacy impact statement. Who would like to go next?
Okay, Danny, this is Danny.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that just one important thing the government is doing is the implementation of the common spatial data infrastructure.
Right.
I think this is one of the biggest projects about open data, because the purpose of CSDI is to facilitate the discovering, viewing, and sharing of data openly. So,
Okay.
so I think this is an important tipping point. For
Okay, so making the full CSDI open and public.
Yeah.
Is yours. Okay. Eric or Chilam?
Yeah. In my aspect, I'm focusing on the logistic needs for the Hong Kong people, so that I find that there is many people suffering for the non-address and the delivery not successful because the non-address, So I'm thinking that open data is very good right now, and government is trying to release any kind of data to the public, but the enhancement of it is necessary for our startup to provide better service for the public, so that the unit building ID is what I'm looking forward to having the big efficiency for the logistic world. So I'm looking forward that the unit.
So full rollout of the building ID.
Yeah.
Correct. Excellent. So Eric, I'm going to go first because I'm going to hand over to you to have a final wrap up. So my number one, so if anybody has watched my video, you probably can guess that my number one is for the government to implement the two laws, the two new laws, the government records law, and even more importantly, the access to information law, and that they are drafted in such a way as to have a very broad definition of public bodies and a very narrow definition of exemptions. So those are the two things that I think will make the biggest difference. So Eric, you get to say last, and also you can wrap up anything you want to say about link to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Very kind. I see ease of use as a really large issue for the future as well, so that really people can make use of this data. And not just the people who have the technical capabilities, but really the data is very accessible, maybe different formats, so that really this use can reach everyone. The largest change, though, I think, is that I'm often in conversations which are very technical, and then other realms of conversation where people are very less technical, but have very good ideas. And what I'm trying to do is actually get the two people together in the room. So I think it's forums like this that are really critical for making sure that these amazing ideas and accessibility to data, which I think Hong Kong does so well, reaches a wider impact. And I'm trying to think of more ways that we bring people together, so especially doctors and others from other realms can really start to think about what this data could mean to them. I'm also seeing a huge change through AI. And one of these huge changes is that a lot that used to be done with a lot of conceptual computer power can actually be done now with a machine learning chip on your cell phone, which means that the way our data is analyzed is transformed considerably. And the way that we can utilize data is actually very different than it was even a few years ago. So what I think this means for me and for potentially Hong Kong is the way that we structure and set up the data so that the danger behind AI is that the privacy is actually the biggest impact. And we can see with Clearview AI in the US and other impact of AI on facial recognition, that these are very, very powerful systems. And so we also have to be very careful about how those systems are allowed and what are the limits of those systems as well. And I think that with AI, it's not just the facial recognition, which is very much in the news, or tracking the 3D data of your cell phone as it connects to the network, but also even how we walk, our gait data is also identifiable.
Sorry, Eric, can I just interject for one moment? Because something which I think neither OGCIO or PCPD mentioned is I believe they have a common initiative on a fair use of AI, which should be released later this year. So I think that will be, I think, an important piece of context for that conversation. I'm not going to comment on it. I've seen an earlier draft, but I think at least there is some awareness of the importance of that. Sorry,
I'm very glad to hear that, because I think,
yeah.
I mean, I'm a great lover of AI. I think it's very powerful, especially for medical uses. There's amazing medical uses in the public realm, meaning like health data in the urban sense that we'll be able to gather from AI, but also on the privacy, there's always that tension and that risk as well.
Yep.
And then the largest point I want to make is I think being very future oriented, that a lot of the things that we take as sort of common risk today, using influenza or COVID as examples, these health risks that we're living with at the moment, they're going to come back. I mean, now we've seen all these infectious diseases come back year after year, and we also know influenza has this huge health risk year after year. I think that the way that we use data and make it accessible, as Hong Kong is, then allows us to also make use of it through time. So a lot of it is being seen as like a snapshot in the moment. And what is really wonderful about even the COVID data that's coming through is you can track things through time and how clusters grow and shrink. And you can really make use of the data as well. And I think that this opening up of data and being incredibly open to it is already, as pointed out by Donald, is having a huge impact. I mean, 600 million downloads is incredible. And so that's really transforming our city and also the region as well. And I'd love for Hong Kong to be the front runner of this, of course, with privacy intact. And I think historically, it's a city that has a lot of wealth and it can afford to do so. I think it can be a leading city in this regard, in terms of both data and privacy.
Hong Kong has been a leader in personal data protection in Asia. So I think there is an opportunity for us to do these things in a safe way. Anyway, I would like to thank all the panelists so much for their presentations and their engagement during the Q&A. I would like to thank all of you who've been listening in. We had over 100 people listening in through most of the 2 hours. This is a long time. So this has been recorded, the Q&A. So we will place the Q&A on YouTube and we'll make this all publicly available. And we will be, of course, having 3 other sessions. So if you've registered, you will get the messages from Just about our other events. And she's reminded me that I need to ask you, let's see if I can get it. Yes, here we go. There's a QR code for feedback. So we value your feedback so that we can try and make sure that our events improve and are even more relevant and useful in future. So please do scan the QR code and give us your feedback. If you don't want to use the form, you can email Just using the contact information you've already got from her. And indeed, we look forward to having many of you back in our subsequent events. So thank you all very much again indeed. And I will now stop the recording. So I will leave the share up. Okay, thank you all very much. And we'll be in touch again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.